What did the Super Bowl tell us about the San Francisco 49ers? We're going to discuss that and a lot more on tonight's Hammer Nayls Show. Welcome to the Hammer Nayls Show Valentine's Day edition. I'm Jack Hammer, and with me, as always, my partner in crime, Jessie Naylor. Jessie, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I was trying to come up with some punny Valentine's Day, like, kid card thing that I could just say, but I'm not that clever, so I didn't do it.
Hey, that's okay. I was going to say, I wanted to shout out really quick everybody that's watching this live who has told their wife or significant other, hold on, I need to listen to what Jack and Jessie have to say about the San Francisco 49ers. That comes first. I'll take you out on our date after. But for right now, it's time for some 49ers. So just sit down, relax. We got to get on with the show.
Yeah, either that or we have a bunch of single people in the chat. Either way, thank you for supporting us.
Absolutely. We do have some good ones over here. We have Raphael.
Or newly single people, I should say.
Or soon to be single, newly single people. We got Raphael 5629ers, member of the Toolbox here, says, "What's up, Jack, Jessie, members of the Toolbox, and everyone. Hey, Raphael, good to have you on board." We have Brian Culp, who's shouting out Raphael, and he wants to know what's up with me, and I think he also wants to know what's up with Jack. We're here. We're ready to talk some 49ers football. We've got Luke Walsh in the house, who says, "Hey, everyone." Luke is one of the great readers over at the PD site. And then Patobo Hammer in the here says, "Jack, the great, always with the great content. Thank you very much, Patobo. I appreciate it." And let's get on with the show. You look at this going back to Sunday, and we were talking just really briefly before the show. A lot of, the game on Sunday, I thought it was a fantastic game, really entertaining on both sides of the ball. It's kind of funny. It's like a tale of two halves. And I will say this, the 49er fans and Eagles fans have been jawing back and forth for the last 2 weeks. And now now 49er fans and Eagles fans have something to commiserate about, because both sides have had second half leads against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl by 10 points, and both have gone home without the Lombardi trophy. So instead of arguing with each other, just break some bread and shake hands and commiserate in your losses.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's going to be that easy, Jack. A lot of trash talk. I do find it interesting, though, because as a fan and dealing with Eagles fans, they basically told us to suck it up and take our L. Well, I would like to return the favor and say that you should do the same. And one thing I can't, and I don't know how this got so much traction on Twitter. It's just the way I felt, but I'm not going to celebrate the Chiefs beating the Eagles. A lot of people are like, yeah, that's what you get. You deserve it. The 49ers didn't beat them. So I'm not going to be that guy that's like, my team didn't beat yours, but you still didn't win the Super Bowl. Haha. All I will say is you didn't win the Super Bowl. Season's over. Take your L. Move on. The complaining, all the bitching, all the moaning, you told us we can't do it. So that's all I'm going to say back to you. You can't do it either.
I'm with you on that. I went into the game and I predicted that Kansas City was going to win the game. I just looked at it and kind of in looking at it, I felt like if the Chiefs could just slow them down, they were going to win the game because they had the better quarterback. So the onus was on the Chiefs defense to get a couple ups. And if they did that, I felt like they'd win. So I predicted they were going to win the game. And so, I wanted to be right. So that was that's why I was rooting for the Chiefs to win. But what a performance put on by Jalen Hurts. Thought he was excellent for the most part. It was a game that came down to two things. It came down to a scoop and score fumble for Kansas City and a punt return that took it all the way down to the 5 that set up a second touchdown. Without that, I think you look at this game and the Philadelphia Eagles did exactly everything that you would want to do to beat the Kansas City Chiefs, except for the turnover and this one bad play on special teams. Everywhere else, I thought it was a perfect performance.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the Eagles, that's what's crazy to me is you look at Jalen Hurts. I mean, he was the best player on the field. I don't think there's any doubt about it. He played so damn well. kudos to him, by the way. I mean, he's about to get paid. A lot of people slept on him going into this season. Oh, look at the one-day 49er logo that we had once.
Yes.
But I think the Eagles played well. They had time of possession by a wide margin. They didn't run the ball, extremely effective outside of Hurts, but they put up 35 points. They owned time of possession. They did what you would think it would take to win a game, going into it. And it wasn't enough. The Chiefs were so perfect in the second half when they needed it most, allowing Patrick Mahomes. I mean, you add in that he didn't get sacked. Some of that was some of his own magician work for sure. A lot of it was the O-line protecting him. I thought after he'd hurt his ankle that was going to be it for him and he would really struggle in the second half. And that just was not the case. I mean, he's incredible, man. That team's incredible. As long as they have Kelsey, they have Mahomes, and they have Reed, they're going to be a force.
Yeah, that's it. You go back and you look at the game plan that Andy Reid put together, right? We spent a lot of time on the show after the Eagles game talking about that choice to leave the tight end single covered, one-on-one with Hassan Reddick. And you look back at the game on Sunday and what do you know? Andy Reid figured out a way to not do that once throughout an entire game. And he figured out a way to, believe it or not, actually do play action with that, which was I was told was impossible based off of some of the smarter folks on 49ers Twitter. But, they found a way to do it, and they played a heck of a game on their side of the ball. I thought they ran the ball really good. That was the biggest thing, was their ability to run the ball in the second half. They came out and ran the ball really well. The other thing with the game that was interesting, a lot of people talked about when you look back to the game against the Eagles, one of the other things that's been a talking point is the 49ers deferring to open up the game against Philly. And so I cracked a joke at the beginning of the game about that. I think it's interesting because you look at the game and the way that it was played out. And the Eagles got the ball first. They scored. It was 24-14 at half. It should have been 24-7, but 24-14. Second half, flip it around. Kansas City gets the ball. Kansas City puts up 24 points, and they win 24-11 in the second half, and that's the difference of the game. It's just kind of, it's a full game, and so I understand people talk about like there's this the early part of the game, people get so tied up in it, but you just look at it, what Andy Reid did in this game and the way that he adjusted as this thing went on. It's a 4-quarter game, and he's shown it time and time again, that ability to adjust in the second half and make changes. And I thought their plan in the second half was excellent.
Yeah, I think, for the 49er game, Jack, I think the reason that you hear a lot of that stuff is because it is a 4-quarter game, but unfortunately that game was really a 2-possession game. And so
right.
You only can analyze so much of that. You know what I mean? So you're going to over-analyze everything in that game that happened in the first 2 possessions, offensively and defensively, because that's really all that you had. You look at the Kansas City Philadelphia Super Bowl. I mean, that was a full 4-quarter game. And so there's a lot to analyze there. I always prefer to defer. I mean, that's what I would do. I would much rather have the ball in the second half. I just feel like it's an advantage. It always seems like you have a chance to score right before half, and then you get the ball back. It seems to work out that way for whatever reason. And so I choose to defer. There's no way that I would scrutinize that decision by the 49ers to do that, but it's going to be scrutinized because that's a part of really only 2 drives that mattered in that game.
Yeah, they getting the ball in the second half, and they almost did. It looked like they had the ball at the end of the first half. They didn't put points on the board, but that's they had the ball. They had an opportunity there to maybe double up, but they weren't able to get it done. But it was a fun game. It was a lot of fun. Like I said, look back at this game, and the question I had for you, and it was the title of the show. When you look at this game, is there anything that this Super Bowl tells you about the San Francisco 49ers moving forward?
Well, moving forward, I have to say this because I did say it on Twitter, and I think that it holds true. A lot of 49er fans are really upset about how the NFC Championship played about. You've got the players that talked about how they thought that they would have won if they had Purdy, and maybe they would have. First of all, there's no guarantee that would have happened, but maybe they would have won that game. I don't think they were beating the Kansas City Chiefs. I think the Kansas City Chiefs are just a whole different level right now. And, I'm sure there are fans and even players that think, if we were healthy, we would have won. I don't think so. I don't think they beat Kansas City. So that's the first thing that I took away, is that Kansas City is the best team in football right now again. And going forward, the 49ers are going to have to figure out how to overcome great quarterback play, especially coming out of the AFC once they make it to a Super Bowl, because whether it is Patrick Mahomes, whether it's Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, they're going to be playing the elite of the elite and players that have shown that they can go down and score very, very quickly with not many timeouts or any timeouts left in their pocket. It's just a different breed over in the AFC with some of those quarterbacks, and that's something they're going to have to overcome. And I don't know if right now they have the quarterback on the roster that can compete in those scenarios.
Yeah, I think they do. I think they have the ability. You look at what they did over the end of the season, really what they did over the last 10 weeks of the regular season. They averaged over 30 points. And that's even with a couple of stinkers in there when Jimmy Garoppolo was still in there. They had a couple of stinker games, 21 against, 13 against New Orleans. Really kind of drive that down. I think the other one was 21 against Seattle, up in Seattle. But other than that, they were in the 30s, pretty close to it, I think. I do think that they have the firepower to keep up with them. I do. The difference, I think, is I think the 49ers defense is better than the Eagles defense. Overall, I think they would have had a better chance against this team on Sunday. I think their back end, as much as we talk about that being the weaker of the pieces of this defense, I think the 49ers back end would have matched up a little bit better. I know we go back to week 7 and what happened against the Chiefs in that game, but in that game, you also had Nick Bosa coming off of the injury, and you had Charvarius Ward playing injured. And so just kind of looking at the way they played over the end of the season, the way they played in the beginning of that Eagles game and how well they defended the Eagles, I think that they would have been able to put up a good fight. I think they would have been right there to win the game on Sunday too.
Yeah, I don't think they would have gotten blown out by any means. I definitely don't believe that. But Jalen Hurts, like I said, in my opinion, he outdueled Patrick Mahomes, and that still wasn't enough to get it done. It's like when you are going against the best quarterback in the world and somehow your quarterback plays arguably better than that quarterback and you still don't win, that's demoralizing. And we can say the defense may have been given a better showing, but there is no way that Brock Purdy, Jimmy Garoppolo, if Brock Purdy was hurt, Trey Lance at this stage, like that, it just wasn't going to happen. Like they don't have a quarterback that would have outdueled Patrick Mahomes on this roster, not at this moment. So I don't know. I don't know. I mean, if you would have told me going into that Super Bowl that Jalen Hurts was going to be clearly the best player on the field, I'd be like, yeah, they won the Super Bowl. What are we even talking about here? But that was not the case.
Well, I think it's different. I think the 49ers offense and the Eagles offense are very different offenses. I think that's partly why in terms of what they do in the passing game. You watch the Eagles, and I mentioned this during the game, but for the Eagles passing offense is pretty much 5 yards, 10 yards and under, usually more like 5. It's all short slants, screens, or deep shots. That's what we saw. There was a couple of intermediate throws, but not very many. I think the 49ers work more of the intermediate routes off the running game. So I think that a guy like Purdy and the player makers that the 49ers could have put up the yards against them. They did put up 360 something yards against the Chiefs the first time around in the passing game. So I think they could have moved. I don't think they would have been unable to move the ball. I think they would have been able to move it. I think they would have. Their running game is different too. It's not dependent on. The Eagles were very dependent on Sunday on Jalen Hurts on the ground as well. Just I don't know if it's because of the way that the Chiefs are playing them or just because that was the game plan that they had going in there. But I think the 49ers offense, I think we're underselling them a little bit to think that they couldn't have put up something close to what the Eagles put up if they were healthy. If you had Brock Purdy healthy in that game, I think he could have had a performance similar to what we saw.
Yeah, maybe.
But it's again, it's different. It's different in that he's not hitting, the deep throws that they had, right? I'm not saying he's going to hit those deep shots.
No. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, it's going to be more in the middle range because that's what it's more, 30 yards and in kind of thing with what they do most of the time in this offense and what he's been successful with. That's my takeaway on it. And again, I think it comes down also to the 49ers defense. you also, one other thing, sticking on the offensive side and sticking on the 49ers as a whole, we talked about that turnover, the fumble return that gave Kansas City life, really made it at a 14-14 game instead of putting more points on the board. That puts them at a deficit. They're -1 in the game. And you do that, and it's hard to win. And that's the same situation for the 49ers. When the 49ers were minus in the turnover margin, they didn't win this season. And so, again, I think the Eagles' game plan, or the way that the Eagles were trying to move the ball on the ground and those kind of things, and just churn up the clock, and the way that the 49ers try to move the ball on offense, I thought it was very similar in terms of what they were trying to accomplish. You go about a little bit different ways, but I think that's what they were trying. Very similar.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I think they wanted to control the time of possession, which they did a great job of. Obviously, the 49ers would do that. I would say that the Eagles, I would be curious to see how guys like Frank Clark and Jones would play against the 49ers offensive line, because the Eagles offensive line, I think, is in a whole different stratosphere, top to bottom, outside of Trent Williams, obviously. But I just think their offensive line's in a whole different stratosphere. And so I think that right there would make things interesting. And I'll say this, the back end of the 49ers defense might be better. I mean, player for player, I think it's pretty close. But, I mean, the Eagles, who accounted for 70 sacks this year, could not get home. I mean, do we think that the 49ers, with really, I mean, Bosa is their one elite pass rusher, a couple other guys that sprinkle in there that, that can get after the quarterback a little bit of Minahu, but not near the level that some of those guys on the Eagles can, especially not in the waves that they do it. I mean, do we think that the 49ers secondary would hold up if that defensive line wasn't getting home, which I think is fair to say that they probably wouldn't have?
Yeah, no, I don't think they would get home anymore. I think they put pressure on them, but they're not going to get home. The field conditions were rough too for both teams on that one. And I just look at it and I just have this, Kansas City played a good game. Again, they're good, but the way that this game played out, it comes down to the Kansas City defense scoring points and the special teams scoring points. And the 49ers special teams, when it comes to punt coverage, was pretty good all year long, I think. And their defense, their offense in terms of turnovers had been very good under Brock Purdy since he took over those last 8 weeks that he was in there too. They hadn't turned the ball over very much. So that's why I kind of lean in that direction. But hey, I think the 49ers are right there. I think the oddsmakers who are saying that the 49ers are favorites in the NFC are correct. I think they're right there with as they were constructed last season, as well as I think what they're going to look like going into 2023.
Yeah, and I mean, I think they're right there as well. I don't think they're that far off. There's definitely some things that they got to figure out this season. There's some things that they've got to figure out in the offseason. There's some holes that they've got to fill that are at very important positions. I'm curious to see how they go about that. But I think ultimately, I would have definitely much rather seen the 49ers in the Super Bowl and seen how it played out. Although if they lost again, I don't know how I would have handled that as a fan. But, overall, I do think they're close. I think the Eagles are certainly going to take a back step. And in fact, I just finished recording. I haven't posted yet, but for my second channel, a video on the Eagles and how much they've got to deal with this offseason. And it is a ton, Jack. I mean, they've got free agents all over the place. It's crazy. So, I think the 49ers are certainly right there. Although I will say this, I think that the Eagles have 2 first-round draft picks, and they do draft well. So if they hit on those, we'll see. And then you've got the Seahawks, who, I mean, right now they're not on the 49ers level, but you give them another year to develop. They also have 2 first-round picks. They have a ton of money in free agency. They might make things interesting as well. So we'll see how it plays out. I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk by any means, although I think the NFC overall is going to take a bit of a step back. And I think if I were to pick right now, I would put the 49ers at the top, but I don't, there's no guarantees for sure.
No, there's no guarantees for sure. And you look at the roster as it's constructed right now for the 49ers. The 49ers have 16 of their 22 starters returning. They're losing only 3 on both sides. Their center and right tackle, we don't know what's going to happen. One of those guys or both won't be back. I think there's a possibility that only one of them might be back, and that would be the center. but who knows what the cost is going to be there. So I'm not. And then the other one on the offense that's going to be leaving. I'm drawing a blank on him right now. It might not even be on offense, but I think that's it. Just the center and the right tackle, because otherwise the quarterbacks are there. Receivers are there, and then you get on the defensive side of the ball, and you're losing Jimmy Ward, Tayshawn Gibson, excuse me, Samson Ebicom,
Mosley,
Emmanuel Mosley, also, but he wasn't. Don't include him as a starter because he hasn't been a starter for so long, right? Yeah. At the end. But as far as if you looked at week 1 starters, I guess that would be different. But they have a lot of their guys coming back already, and they have a pretty good amount of depth. So I like that. That's one of the reasons why I like them as a early favorite in the NFC. And we're kind of combining a couple of our topics here, because the other one was the impact on the 49ers with what's going on with Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it. You mentioned already the free agents, and they have a big number of free agents out there in Philadelphia. And then on top of that, they just lost both of their coordinators, one going out to Arizona, the other one to the Colts. So I think the 49ers are in a really good spot here. And then if you just spread out outside of that, you look at the teams that were in the playoffs. Tampa Bay is not a playoff team next year, unless the NFC South is just dog awful,
Yeah.
So I think the 49ers are right there.
I think, yeah, I was just going to say, like, real quick, you're right. I mean, they're most likely not going to be there. There will be a team that comes out of that division. I mean, I would say the early favorite there is Carolina, I think Detroit. I think Detroit's going to take a big leap this next year. I think they'll be a fun, interesting team to watch for sure. But they're not quite. You know what I mean? They're not going to. I don't think they're going to go from out of the playoffs to all of a sudden like the main competitor to the 49ers in one season. We'll see, but I don't see it. Although they do have a couple first round picks. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think at least on paper early, and the guys that we mentioned for the 49ers, it's not like they're for sure going to lose all of them. I would assume that a couple of them come back. I don't know which ones for sure, but I would hope that at least a couple of them come back. They certainly have the money to bring a couple of them back. So we'll see how it plays out. You're right about that.
Yeah. Well, and when you look at the 49ers free agents on the offensive line, Mike McGlinchey and Jake Brendel, what direction do you lean on those two?
I mean, I don't think McGlinchey comes back. I think he's going to price himself out. I do. It's funny because the 49er fans are usually not big fans of Mike McGlinchey. And he definitely, I mean, he has some weird moments, times where he gets put on a poster. He got rock bottom by Parsons in the divisional game. But overall, he's actually pretty good. He's not amazing by any means, but he's probably middle of the pack right tackle, upper middle. And so he's going to get paid by somebody. He's going to get paid by somebody. And because of that, I just don't think I think it's a Tomlinson situation where it's like, we think we can replace him in-house potentially for a fraction of the cost. Maybe there's a drop off, but maybe there's not. Maybe a young player steps up and we're able to kind of fill that gap. Brendel, I think, is a different story. I mean, I think they could certainly have him back if they would like. I don't think he'll cost a ton. Maybe he'll hike up to $4 or $5 million a year, but I don't think he'll be outpriced the 49ers range. But again, the 49ers like to do things in house, and they do have some options there, whether it's Sekeld or what have you. So it'll be interesting to see what they do on the offensive line. But I'd be shocked if McGlinchey's back. What do you think?
It's going to be interesting to see, because I understand the Lake and Tomlinson thing. But do the 49ers, do they really value tackles, or is it, to me, it seems like they might value tackles more than they value the interior offensive linemen, just kind of similar to how they valued defensive ends or guys that can do multiple things on that defensive line more than they do a defensive tackle, for example. So McGlinchey, the numbers that I've seen thrown around, the one only number I've seen really thrown around is the PFF thing, 15.5 per year. For a guy like Mike McGlinchey and what he's capable of doing, I don't think that's too much. The step back, and if they stay in house, it's like you mentioned, it's Colt McKivitz. And it's interesting because you look at the team that just won the Super Bowl, right? The Kansas City Chiefs. And if you want to make the argument for the case, make a case for Colton McKivitz over McGlinchey, you look at the Chiefs and you say, well, look at the Chiefs. They just won the Super Bowl with a right tackle who was an undrafted free agent and whatever, went through like 3 different teams and, just started. And Andrew Wiley, who was that right tackle, is going to be an unrestricted free agent this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, they have other options too. I mean, a lot of people haven't, it has been brought up, and I know that some people are frustrated with the conversation, but I also wouldn't be shocked if they give Burford a shot there. I mean, Burford primarily played tackle in college, mostly left tackle, but he played some right tackle and some interior. I don't think that that's out of the realm of possibility, especially if they like what Poe brings to the table, if they feel like Poe's a guard, or maybe Jalen Moore, who has always been, he's been playing out of position the whole time. He's a guard. He's a natural guard. He is not a tackle. Maybe they like him at guard, and so they slide Burford over. I think that they have options. Do they like those options more than McGlinchey? I would say if everything's even, probably not. But when you start to factor in the money that will go to McGlinchey, they might like those options a little bit better, when all things are factored in even there.
Yeah, and the hard part about the McGlinchey deal is if you do give it to him, what is he right now, 28?
Yeah.
So,
something
you're looking, a lot of times tackles can play into their late 30s, depending on their health. But he hasn't been, the poster boy for health in his career with the 49ers. He's been dealing with some stuff coming off a really bad injury from last year. I think that their best bet is to bring back Mike McGlinchey. I've said that a couple of times. I'll say it again. I think that if they lose McGlinchey, I think that is something that could really cost them moving forward. It's definitely not improving their offensive line. I think if they lose Mike McGlinchey. So I think this offensive line this year, I think it's a little bit underrated by some fans. I think this offensive line was the best offensive line that they've had under Kyle Shanahan. The numbers bear it out, at least. So, the other one, the interesting one is the center position. You look at Jake Brendel, and I saw a tweet earlier today from Grant where he put out some numbers showing Nick Zakelj versus the guy that's out. I think he's out in Cleveland now, one of the free agent centers from Cleveland. And and you look at his numbers, very similar numbers in terms of their combine totals, with their like their 20-yard splits and things like that. They're very similar, not the 20-yard split, but the shuttle, things like that. And then I quote tweeted it with the numbers from Jake Brendel at the draft, and the other one was Ethan Poches from the Browns. I think he was originally drafted by the Seahawks, but Brendel's stat, combine numbers and the quickness categories, and even in the strength is very similar to both of those guys. And then I just wonder if they're going to try to bring a guy in who has more strength, but that hasn't been something that they've really had at that center position.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that they do. I think they drafted Zakelj to be the center for sure. And so, I mean, are they ready to make that transition again? I mean, Brendel's going to be a heck of a lot cheaper if they really wanted to bring him back. But I'll say that this is also a pretty heavy center draft too, and a lot of these guys are going late. I know that Forsyth out of Oregon. Obviously, I'm an Oregon Duck guy, but he's a really, really good player, and he might even go undrafted. So there's some options there that you can bring in to either compete with Zakelj or be the backup, maybe be a backup center guard combo. How much do they value Brunskill? Do they make sure that he's back on this team? I mean, this is a guy who can play all the positions. He's been a jack of all trades. And so I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I mean, I think the offensive line will have depth. I don't think they're going to lose depth per se, but that starting lineup that they roll out, at least on paper, may not be as good as it was last year, but maybe they have a surprise. Maybe they have a trick up their sleeve. Banks, he kind of came out of nowhere. A lot of people had already written him off, which is crazy. They put him at right guard. Then they moved him back to left guard. He lost some weight. A lot of people said he couldn't anchor and he looked bad and all these other things. And then he just came out and I mean, he played every bit as good as Tomlinson did the year prior, and Tomlinson made a Pro Bowl. So I think it depends on what they've seen in practice from these guys. They see things that we are unable to see and we're not privy to seeing. And maybe they just look at it and say, hey, Mike, nice knowing you. Wish we could have you back, but you're not worth 16 million. We think we have a great option here, and whoever they decide to go with, and that's what they roll with. So it'll be really interesting to see what they do.
Yeah, what you just said right there just a second ago is really the point. That's that we haven't seen these guys, and I'm including myself in that, because even though I'm at practice during the week, we don't get to really see them work like we do during training camp. During training camp, once training camp ends, we don't really see what the offensive line looks like the rest of the season unless they're playing in the games. And so I can't tell you what the development was of Zakel throughout the season, how much work he was getting at center, how much was he improving, and those types of things. And it's kind of like what happened. That's really what led to all the talk about Aaron Banks last offseason at this time, because nobody saw the work that he'd put in. Nobody was believing what Kyle Shanahan had said at the end of their press conference about, that they had felt comfortable of possibly putting him into the lineup later on in the season, and they started winning games, and so they stuck with what they had. So, I think that's one of the parts that's going to be really interesting when we get to May, when mini camps and all those kind of things start to happen, is when we can start to watch these guys perform again, so we can start to see, hey, this guy does look a lot better. I think this offseason is going to be one where you see the Flyers make some moves. They have a lot of flexibility with the cap as well. They're $15 million better than they were last year at this point. Last year they were over the cap by about $4 million. This year they're under the cap by 11, so that's where I get the 15 from. And they have at least 5 guys that they can move money around really easily if the players are willing to do it and the team wants to do it, to create cap space to bring back every player that we're talking about on the roster and add a couple too. So it'll be really an interesting offseason, to say the least. Yeah,
it definitely is going to be an interesting offseason. And the 49ers have kind of done this thing the last couple of years where they lay low a little bit. They have somebody a big name, maybe like a second tier big name that you would look at when you look at the free agent list. You have your top 5, top 7, and they have that second tier. And they always target one guy in there, and they usually end up landing him. So I'm wondering who that guy is this year. What position does he play? And I feel like the 49ers will definitely go out and add somebody else from outside that'll be a player that we're excited about going into next year as well.
I think that, we're focusing on the offense in most of our conversation, and there was a name over here that was thrown out that might be one to keep an eye on, and that's Jordan Poyer. The safety from Buffalo. I think he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. You look at this defensive side of the ball, where do you see the needs to make some improvements?
It's interesting for the number one defense. I feel like there's a lot of areas of opportunity, especially a defense and a team that has poured a lot of assets into that defensive line. I think that defensive line right now going into the offseason might be the biggest area of opportunity. I think they need a defensive tackle. I think they need a running mate for Bosa. Certainly, they're going to need a safety. There's a lot of safeties out there, by the way, that can make an impact on this team. So, there's some areas of opportunity, but I would say right now it's that defensive line. You pick your poison. Do you want to go edge? Do you want to go interior? Either way, they're going to need somebody at both of those positions.
Yeah, and that's really you kind of look at it, and they had a ton of depth there on that defense, but they don't have most of those guys coming back. They have three of their 4 starters: Kinlaw, Bosa coming back, Kevin Givens, and Drake Jackson as backups. Well, we don't know really what they have in Kalia Davis yet. We saw a little bit of them towards the end of the season when they brought him off for the 3-week practice window. But they have a lot of depth issues, I think, along that defensive line. And when you look at it, the defensive line is, I think, like as you said, I agree with you. That's the biggest opportunity point in order to improve. We talk all the time about how the defensive line drives the 49ers defense. And if you take Nick Bosa off the field, they didn't have a driver up there. So I think when you look at that defensive line, that getting a guy opposite of Bosa that can get to the quarterback, that's a big piece. Because Ebicom has proven he is who he is. He's a 4.5 to 5 sack guy. This year he got 5, but the most before that he had 4.5 the 3 years before. So I think we pretty much know who Samson Ebicom is in terms of as a pass rusher. He's a good run defender on opposite of Bosa. He sets the edge well. He's pretty good in that regards. But I think they need to get I hate to bring up the name, but they need a guy kind of like D Ford who can come off the opposite edge to really help him out.
Yeah, Hassan Reddick would have been real nice last offseason. He would have been perfect, right? Like, he would have been great. No, we talked about him last year, but yeah, I mean, somebody like that, I think, and Jackson might develop into that. That's the great thing, is we just don't know how he's going to develop. He does have the body type. There's no doubt about that. It sounds like he just ran out of steam kind of here down the stretch, which not uncommon for guys coming out of college. It is a longer season, and there's just learning to be a pro is a different thing. And so, as he develops, has a second year with Kocurek, is now no longer a rookie. I mean, his athletic profile certainly fits that. Does he end up being that guy? I don't know, but there's a possibility. And you talked about Davis. I think Davis on the interior might be an impact player too. I mean, we're talking about a really athletic kid who has a low center of gravity, strong. His strength, I think, was an area of opportunity, but from what I understand, the little bit that you guys were able to see or hear about, that he's had some strength, and now he's going to go into a second year where he's not going to be rehabbing, and he's going to be able to continue to add strength. These guys might pop too, and this is what the 49ers have done a fantastic job at, Jack. They find these guys, they essentially redshirt them or play them very little, and they've got 5-6 candidates on this team, offensively and defensively, overall, that could really come out next year and break out. And what they've proven in the past, chances are at least 2 of these guys are going to meet that criteria. So which ones is it going to be? What positions? What area of need? And we're going to find out pretty quickly, because they're going to go through free agency. They're going to let guys go. They're going to not bring in guys that we really like, and we're going to go, I don't know, and we're going to debate it all off season. And reality is that means that they feel like they've got a guy that's ready to break out of the position that we think is a need right now, and they're going, it's not a position of need. You have no idea what's about to happen. So
that sounds like you sound way too much like me a lot of the time when I look at Twitter, and I'm like, what are you guys talking about? You have no idea what you're talking about. And you make a good point with that too, because the Drake Jackson thing, right? If Drake Jackson is the guy, then he steps for Samson Ebukam opposite of Bosa, and he had 3 sacks in the first 6 weeks of the season before he started to fall off. So if he can come in and he can set the edge and give you 5.5, 6 sacks, that's an improvement over what they had last year. And Eric Armstead, they need Eric Armstead to stay healthy, because Armstead, when he was out there this year in the games when he was healthy, he played really well. His numbers weren't there in terms of sacks, but he said, I think there was 2 interceptions for Jimmy Ward that were a direct result of pressure from Eric Armstead. And, I think that they have this. That's, again, we talked about that earlier. They have a lot of guys come in, and you start to really look at the depth of this roster, and it's not like it's completely falling off. So that's when that's why I say I think this team is really set up for 2023. The biggest question mark is what's going to happen behind center. That's the biggest question for this team, but that's going to play itself out over the offseason. I think they'll figure out a way to make it work with either one of them, whether it's 5 or 13. I think they're going to be okay in that position.
Yeah, and I think so too. I think they're going to definitely be okay. It's not. We'll see. I mean, we'll see overall if down the stretch towards the tail end of the season, if it ends up being a position of strength where one of these guys develops and is a top 7, 8, 10 guy. But yeah, I mean, as far as the rest of the depth on this team, I mean, it's there. It's definitely there. And like I said, we're at least a couple of these guys going to break out. We haven't even talked about yet Womack. Obviously, we talked about Zakel, Davis a little bit, Quantrez Knight, Danny Gray. Like, there's so many possibilities on this team, Jack, that can break out, that guys that were redshirted and what have you, that, I mean, you just don't know where it's going to come from next year.
Yeah, that's where, again, you hit on some names there, like Womack. Like, for example, Samuel Womack. So he was a rookie this year. Kind of came, I was high on him after the draft, and we saw what he did in the preseason. He played so well in the preseason and training camp. He's the week 1 starter at nickel after Jimmy Ward goes down. He's the guy. He was the guy off that started the season there, and then he fell off a little bit once the game started, and they pulled him out of there. But the fact that he was able to put himself in that position as a rookie to start with, it shows that there's some potential there. And after a full season of NFL football, get into the weight room, maybe he's a guy that's able to step in and give you a solid play inside and maybe even be a little bit better than Jimmy Ward in terms of, on the coverage end of it. He's got, Jimmy Ward, I think as a tackler against the run, that's going to be tough for him to beat. But as a cover guy, maybe he's going to be a little more solid. There's a lot of names, and you mentioned Danny Gray as well. There's your a little more of a speed element guy. Get a guy that's going to be deep down the field. If Trey Lance is the guy that's the quarterback, maybe you're able to take advantage of that speed a couple of times. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Even the Trey Lance thing. Trey Lance with I talked about this, I think, with you on last Tuesday about how good that offense looked against Seattle in that first series and how it was just, they were just like a machine going down the field, and he didn't even really have to do a whole lot, right? They just went right down the field. He completed a nice ball out there to Ayuk for a gain of like 15, and whatnot. You put him back there with the running backs and the running game that they have, and you're right there with what Philadelphia did this year, which is what I think the vision that Kyle Shanahan had when he drafted Trey Lance was what we saw from the Philadelphia Eagles this year. Run the ball, run it again, and play action and take some shot plays down the field every once in a while, and add that into everything else that he does on offense. And I think that's their goal. If they do roll forward with him, if he does win that job, I think that's the goal.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you just look at his splits, very similar. I know you had tweeted out at some point during that game. It didn't end up holding true the whole game, but you had tweeted out at some point that Hurts really is throwing short and throwing deep and nowhere in between. Now, he obviously did hit some mid-range throws that were keys in that game, but overall,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. That ball on the sideline to
Goddard.
To Goddard, on the third down, where it looked like a great catch, and everything, and then it looked like for a second it might have been incomplete, and they rolled it as complete. That was a beautiful ball. And yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting.
I know, and I think that's something that Trey Lance can bring to the table. He's been accurate more middle range than he has short or deep, and so if he improves just a little bit on some of the gimme stuff and improves a little bit at that mid-range game, we could have a real threat on our hands. And so we'll see how the quarterback position plays out. Like you said, that's going to be the biggest talking point and question mark this offseason. And we're just not going to know. We're not going to know really until they get to camp and how healthy is Purdy, or, unless something this surgery tells us here in the next few days, week or so, it's like, it's for sure going to be 9 months or whatever. If they have him at that 5-6 month mark, like they've been saying this whole time, well, we're really not going to know until we get into camp and just kind of see how things are playing out. So it'll be a lot of fun for sure. I'm curious to see how it plays out, but I think a lot of these other question marks on the team, kind of to your point, is they're going to figure it out, whether it's through free agency, through the draft, or guys that they really think are already on this roster. I think they'll do a good job. That's one thing I will say about the 49ers. I do trust them going into these off seasons. So really last off season, I trusted them. This off season, I trust them. I feel like they've got a good cadence going, and they're going to be just fine.
Yeah, they're on a rhythm. I think the only concern that I have is they've been so close now, right? Let me ask you this. This isn't a topic that we discussed, but think about this one for a second. The 49er community has an affinity for Kyle Shanahan that it doesn't have for Jim Harbaugh, for example, right? And I was just thinking about this over the last couple of days, and it's quite interesting to me because if you take a look at the best 4 years of Kyle Shanahan's career in San Francisco, since he's gotten the guys in place that he needed to get in 2019, his best 4 seasons are no better than the best 4 seasons of Jim Harbaugh, right? In terms of the end results. Stats are great. A lot of points is great. A bunch of yards is great, but it doesn't matter if you're not winning the Super Bowl. I like seeing the team play into the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl and things like that. But, you look at it for you look at these guys who are yelling Super Bowl or bust, who are, all over Jim Harbaugh, but they're loving on Kyle Shanahan and vice versa. It's just an interesting little deal to me.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, if you remove the first 2 seasons of Shanahan, which were the rebuilding years, I think that's fair. He didn't take it on as stacked of a roster. So you give him the 2 rebuilding years. Those next 4 years combined basically pan out to exactly what Harbaugh did. I mean, you had 2 NFC championship appearances, a Super Bowl appearance, and then an 8-8 season or 7, you know what I mean? Roughly basically the same. I think it was 7-9 for Shanahan, 8-8 for Harbaugh in the final year. But yeah, it's been almost identical. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think this team is in a good spot going forward. My concern is having all these close misses, having these long seasons back to back, and they keep rolling forward with it, especially with the losses that they've had. It's one thing if you're winning the big game at the end, but to not win it, maybe I'm making too much out of it because Tom Brady and the New England Patriots were going to the damn AFC Championship game every year. It seemed like for about 20 years.
Yeah, the Chiefs have been there 5 years in a row now, Jack. So I don't.
That's true too.
That's necessarily a bad thing.
That's true too.
Yeah.
It's
listen.
wild.
Once LeBron made it to like 9 straight Eastern Conference Finals or whatever the hell it was like, okay, well, I mean, is wear and tear really that big of a deal? Because we're seeing some crazy stuff happen over here. So.
Yeah, Ben says that I'm making up drama. Fans love both. I don't think so. I think if you mention Jim Harbaugh's name as a high-level coach in the 49ers, just go ahead and go over to Twitter and put that out there and see what your response is, because I know what it's been when I put it out there.
Yeah, I think, it's funny because I feel like the fan base is all over the place, and that's fair. I mean, I'm sure it could be like that for all fan bases, but it depends on where you spend most of your social media time. Yeah. Whether you're on Facebook, whether you're on Bleacher Report, you're in chats here on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, I'm sure. There's so many different opinions, and I feel like it really is kind of groupthink, and you can go to a different platform and hear completely different things, and the groupthink is completely different than what it is on this other platform. It is an interesting thing to watch.
Yeah, it is. That's one of the reasons why, like on Twitter, I try to keep my number of followers small, especially when it comes to like the 49ers people, because I just don't want to get involved with that piece of it, the groupthink piece of it. I try to keep my own, and I know like the more I listen to certain people, the more I start to go and off, kind of lose my own thoughts sometimes. And so that's why I try to keep that number as low as possible, just to keep myself on the straight and narrow. So
for sure,
the whole thing is going to be a lot of fun. I think the 49ers are in a really good spot here. I had a really good question, but then we got off on that other tangent and I blew it and I completely lost it. But if I think about it here in the next 50 seconds or 60 seconds, I'll ask you, but what have you got going up on your channel?
Yeah, in 7 minutes, I'll be live with Sunil. So it is Tuesday, So Real Sunil. And we're going to continue the talk. There's a lot more, I think, going on that we're definitely going to get to. So if you have not had it with 49er Talk, you are already sleeping on the couch because it's Valentine's Day and your wife's mad at you. You are about to be single because your significant other is mad at you, or you already are single. Head over to Last Second Sports and we will keep this thing rolling.
Absolutely. So make sure you get over there. Check that out over there. Make sure you're following Jessie over to Last Second Sports. It's in the description of the show as well. So if you need to, go ahead and look down there and you'll find it. It's super easy here on YouTube. Just check it, search it if you can't figure it, find it on your own. So, but make sure you're checking them out. And like Raphael 5629 says here, he always does the good deed for me. He says, like and subscribe, everybody. Hit that like button. Jessie did a great commercial for me last week, so I won't ask him to do it again, but hit that like button, please, and then hit the subscribe button. It's the off season, but we're going to be bringing you shows throughout the off season and keeping you guys informed with all the breaking news and everything as it happens. And got Jessie and all my regulars on the channel, looking at a couple of others voices to add to the channel as well over the off season. So keep it locked in here as well to the Jack Hammer channel. Get over to Last Second Sports and hit those like buttons, hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell notification so you know when we go live. Other than that, Jessie, I appreciate you making the time. Yeah,
I was just going to say, off season is interesting because you get a lot of people that are ready to take a break and they just kind of tune out for a month or so here as they start to get ready for free agency. And then, of course, after the draft, you got people tuning out again. But you have the diehards. The diehards are going to jump channel to channel. And I'll say this for content creators. I mean, this is the hardest time of year. This is where content creators separate themselves, coming up with topics, keeping things relevant. So for those that are going to continue to put out content throughout this offseason, definitely make sure that you go and support them, not just Jack or I, but everybody. Go support everybody, because if they're putting out content, they're working hard to put out that content. Believe you me.
Yeah, especially right now, and this next month, and then is kind of a little bit tough as we roll into free agency, and then you have that dead period after OTA is finished, and you have about a month and a half between that period and the start of training camp. It gets really tough during those two. So, like Jessie said, make sure you're checking them out. Hit those like buttons for everybody, because the like button is the biggest thing for everybody. We all like the subscribers, trust me, but the like button is the one that helps get us, because the more you guys hit the like button, the more that YouTube's like, hey, people like this stuff. And so then it starts to get filtered out to other folks. So just, again, thank everybody for tuning in. Jessie, thank you for taking the time to join in with me and talk ball. Appreciate that. And have a good show. Tell Sunil I said hi. And everybody else, make sure you have a good rest of your Valentine's Day. Take care. Enjoy yourselves. We'll talk to you soon.